wasn't sure how to approach this video, but because there was just too many things happening lately within the school, and it's such a hot topic for everybody, one that affects a lot of parents, and I, as a parent myself, who's raised my kids and seen them grow up and kind of like spread their wings, and can't say 100%, nothing is safe and nothing's guaranteed, but I know that they can take care of themselves, verbally and otherwise. The bully scenario is a huge topic for everybody, and not something a lot of people feel comfortable with. I can tell you that a lot of people would rather deny it, than have to face it, because there's no parent that wants to sit and tackle such an issue or believe that it could happen to their kid. And the fact that they feel powerless is an issue in itself, okay? What I did want to address is a couple of things that I've heard lately that kind of like bother me, in the sense of, to what extent this bullying scenario is going, has reached. There's bullying is, I would assume, I would think it's on a spectrum, okay? Like many other type of, conditions, it has its spectrum. There's low end, which is, bullying, but not to an extent where it carries on for too long. And then there's the extreme other side, where it becomes very malignant, right? It affects everybody and everything around that individual, Imagine this now. Your child comes home, and this, having seen it, let alone hear it from the parents, kind of struck me. It was a little hard to take, because of the level of aggression that is going on now. The type of bullying that's out there is just absolutely disturbing. So imagine this. Your kid comes home at the end of the day, and you see his arm all markered up, right? And now the first thing that goes through a parent's mind is like, what's that all about, right? You wouldn't believe, you more or less, unless you know your child very well. So what happens is, now the kid has a problem with, this is a 10-year-old, and he's a small 10-year-old, and he has a problem with a huge 10-year-old. It's like twice the size of him. And for some reason, this huge 10-year-old has singled out this particular child. So what happens now is, he grabbed his arm and he started markering up his forearm. Just markering it up. I remember the parent, the father telling me this, and this is a personal friend of mine. Very, very, these kids having very smart parents, very involved parents. Which they are doing everything right about raising their kids, because their kids themselves are just two incredible individuals. And this particular kid, being smaller than the bigger guy, tried to get away, and he just couldn't, and the guy just marked up his arms. Let's go one step. You think that's bad? Let's go one step further. So your child has alopecia, and for those that don't know, it's just a person that has no hair or has lost his hair at some point, and it just won't grow back. All hair, eyebrows, eyelashes, head, the whole shebang. And you come home one day to see your child's head has been markered up. And some guy just grabbed him last day of school and decided, I'm going to use his head as a canvas. Now, I can only imagine what the parent must be thinking, because to hear it from the parent and to see the effect it had on the child, for myself, was, as a martial arts instructor and as a parent myself, I kind of play two hats, and I have to wear those two hats. And sometimes it's very, very, very hard wearing the hat of the instructor that's going to say, well, I think we need to show restraint. I think we need to, take it from this particular angle and look at it from this side. And here's the problem with this, is that when we take into consideration, the fact that we intellectualize everything, that only gives strength to the bully. And this is what's happening in today's society, okay? Like I said, there's bullying, to a lesser degree, and then there's bullying to an extreme degree. And now this is a 10-year-old, okay? And the other is a 13-year-old. Now, there's bullying to the point where, sometimes, you can tease somebody, but like I said, because it's on a spectrum, some bullies won't cross a particular line because there's a certain amount of empathy that is still inside them. So they'll kind of hold back. They will, because they know it'll affect the other kid a little too much. It'll probably get them in trouble. There's still a conscience there. They still have a conscience. That's a big thing, okay? Now, then there's those on the other extreme of the scale where they've reached the point now where they have no conscience. There is no empathy. Hence, there's no boundaries. So what are these kids doing is they are mastering their craft. If these kids are not held accountable, they are just working on their craft because it stimulates them. Now, these are kids that actually take pleasure in seeing pain in somebody else. This is where they say, they start developing that, that characteristic of psychopathy. In short, psychopathic, This is where psychopaths develop their skill. They're not formed there yet, but at 10 years old, when these are not stopped, when that behavior isn't addressed, this is where they start growing. They start becoming really, really good at it. And then they become terrors to their workmates, their partners in relationships, their business partners, and so on and so forth. Now, at 10 years old and at 13 years old, when you've got absolutely no conscience about taking a marker and writing on a kid's head, or grabbing a kid's arm and just markering it up and laughing at this, there's a problem here. Now, that kid has his issues that needs to be addressed. The issue now is with the victim themselves. What happens to the victim? Now, the parents are already, totally pissed off about it. They're upset. You can't really do anything because as much as you want to grab that other kid and wring his neck, and I'm sure every parent has thought of that, including myself, I mean, this is just your emotional side kind of like getting in, right? But it's not something that you can do. So what happens in that case? Well, there's advocates about support groups and the teachers and the principals, and I can tell you there's some really great teachers and there's some really great principals that go above and beyond their job and usually wind up getting the raw end of the stick in this scenario. Why? Because nobody wants to dig deep inside, within this problem to solve it. And now, conventional approaches to this would be, well, what's happening now in school is that they're punishing the bully, but they're also punishing the victim. Now, here's the problem with punishing, with this type of an approach itself, and only. It doesn't rectify anything. If anything, don't forget, this bully, this aggressive individual, is on the far end of the spectrum, which and I would recommend anybody who wants to understand this type better, they can pick up George K. Simon, PhD, Dr. George K. Simon, PhD, his book In Sheep's Clothing. It's been around for 20-something years and is still one of the top-selling books in terms of aggressive characters, aggressive individuals, aggressive, disturbed individuals. And his latest book, which is called Character Disturbance. Now, in one book, George K. Simon, he is on the forefront of restructuring the way that they treat these type of extreme bullies, these aggressive, disturbed characters, because there's no other way to say it, and no other way to describe these individuals, because when you have complete complete apathy, and you can do something that is as hurtful to these kids, to your classmates, or to whoever, without feeling any remorse whatsoever, and then slowly building on that craft because you've been slapped on the wrist. Well, what do you think happens usually? They just grow up and they become even better at that. They know how to hide it. They know what appeases people. They know what can get them into trouble. They know how to do it, and they develop amazing characters because it's a false self. It's a mask they put up in front. What hides behind is a very well-honed skill of manipulation and disturbed methods of dealing with people, behaviors that are nothing but toxic and harmful. Now, George K. Simon turns around, in both of his books, he states that the problem with addressing these type of bullies is that conventional psychological treatments and therapy was there more to treat the neurotic, during Freudian's time, and it hasn't really changed since. But now, for the past quite a bit for the last 20 years, he's been on the research to kind of introduce a different approach, because before it was, we can't touch on these people's feelings because it'll negate the therapy. Well, what it did was, because you're not addressing the behavior, because you're afraid that it would hurt the aggressor's feelings, hence hindering his progress, it would enable him to continue doing this. So, in one sense, our mothers were right when they would slap the shit out of us, and break wooden spoons over our heads when we tried to get away with shit. They instilled a certain amount of fear in us that we knew there were consequences to it. Now, going back to what George K. Simon is doing, is he's addressing the behavior. And in the beginning, it was considered, like, where are you going with this? Because traditional, like traditional medicine, traditional psychological therapy, addressed the neurotic more than the aggressive, disturbed individual, like the psychopath, the sociopath, the narcissist, and so on and so forth, the cluster B personalities. Now, the thing is that, going back to the school, when this kid has been outed, he's been confronted, the gig is up, he's been outed, he's been slapped on the wrist. There's no support group that will be able to help this poor kid now, that'll be there, because now the bully is enraged. See, they don't react the way we react, especially when you're dealing with kids on the far end of the spectrum. They just don't react because with the way we do, with remorse, with regret, with understanding we just hurt somebody, and there's real remorse behind that, and there's real reckoning and amends to be made. These kids don't think that way. These particular individuals are void of all that. Not that they cannot redevelop it, but because that type of behavior is never addressed. It's slid underneath the rug, it's been slapped on the wrist, and now it's outed, but now he's enraged because he has been outed, he's been exposed. He's been forced to apologize. He's been brought up to the forefront now. So where does that leave the kid? Well, now he's even in a worse position. There's no support group in the world that'll be able to help that kid when he goes back to school. The parents are helpless because they can't be there all day long, and the teachers and the principals, and I'd say, there are good teachers, there are great teachers, and there are very few great teachers, and they're limited to what they can do. They're not there to prevent fights or, to stop the bullying. They're there to teach, and they do the best that they possibly can. So what's that kid left to do now? And this is what happens. That other kid, the aggressive kid, for him, this is familiar territory. But now, I've been outed because of you, and now I'm enraged. And what this does is, it puts the victim in a worse predicament. He's going to be a permanent punching bag for this individual because you just insulted me. And we've seen that, having grown up and having to see that with different type of individuals in my life, as we were growing up through elementary school, through high school, and through the rest of society. I mean, we knew and understood certain characters, how they progressed. when they weren't, when you couldn't feel for what you did to the other person, they just got worse and worse, and especially if they were enabled. Now, how do these kids, wind up like that? Very simple. These are kids that rule the roost in the house. If the parents don't address the behaviors of these individuals, well, for them, I'm getting away with murder. Because no parent wants to see his kid as having done anything wrong. Although I do have quite a few parents that do hold their kids accountable, and I think that is the biggest issue right here, is if we allow us parents to release these kids and relieve them of any accountability, then we are just creating, we're just helping the rest of society develop more and more self-entitled, especially these type of individuals, self-entitled kids that we're constantly enabling them. We're not letting them own up to their, to their responsibilities and to their actions and their behaviors. We're just letting them slide. My kid can do no wrong. And yet you have the other kid who is now petrified, terrified, and won't go to school. Well, a lot of people will say, well, there's support groups for this, and there's other methods than a kid learning how to fight. And I'd like, wholeheartedly like to say to these people, wake the fuck up. Open up your eyes. Obviously, you've not been put in a scenario where you have seen this or been a part of this or have been victimized like that. In the years that I've been prior to doing this, having grown up myself and then getting involved into this and monitoring what goes on in society, there's only one way, and only one way, the only way to be able, as a child, growing up, before we get into the adolescence and adult stage, where now we can use our head and we can use our brain, we can use our mouth, and we can express ourselves accordingly. But as a child, there's only one way, and that is to be able to stand up for yourself. You see, this bully, he can stand up for himself, but he's picking on this particular individual. And he's doing it because he gets stimulated by that. He gets the fun that he wants out of this kid. This kid now is terrorized. He doesn't want to go back to school. And this is where the behaviors and the different type of behaviors start. The negative behaviors, all the negative triggering that happens on later on in their lives, is because this was never addressed. When you put your kid in a martial arts academy, and this is why I say, a lot of parents misconstrue fun with discipline. Fun, what the kids want, and what the kids need. Everybody should be doing martial arts, because for the bully, it calms him down. For the weak, the meek, for the more timid, it raises him up. It levels out the playing field, just like they do in Japan and some areas of China where they have it in elementary schools and in high schools. That's what it does. It levels out the playing field because there's morals that go along with it too. If that child is not taught, and that the teaching process is arduous enough, because now he's got to fight against his own, that fear that has been developed because of this problem that he has. If he's not capable of standing up for his own space, his own right to have his own space and his own right to be in this society, what we are doing is raising victims to depend on institutions to take care of ourselves, and that is a big problem. If you're depending on anybody else other than yourself to be able to take care of yourself, and how many of you adults have been in altercations in your workforce, forget school, in your workforce, against some manager or against some other co-worker, and you've been shocked and you don't know how to address it. Why? Because you don't have the confidence to. You don't know how to deal with it. What happens in the end when you don't have the confidence, you bottle it, and then you explode. But before you explode, you're going through depression medication, anxiety medication, taking it out on your kids at home, on your husband, on your wife, and then it just becomes one big volcano. Because you haven't been taught to address these things. See, this is what happens when we live in a bubble. These kids need to learn, all kids. The bully needs to have his issues addressed, but we don't care right now about the bully because these issues usually are not addressed. They're never addressed. And he just grows to become a very sophisticated psychopathic narcissist. While the other one becomes a codependent. And he's taught that it's okay to be abused. by coworkers, by bosses, by partners, by spouses, by his own children, who he's going to be afraid to, to raise a hand to or to raise his voice to, because he's worried that, you know what, I might hurt them. At a young age, this is where it's very important for them to be able to learn how to stand up for themselves. Not all kids have the ability to do that. Some do. And I'd say even those that do should be in a martial arts program. Absolutely, it just benefits them more. But the majority of them that don't is where they need to be in a very, very, very good school, a school where they practice real life scenarios, where the teacher has enough experience to be able to, to pass on his knowledge, his real life experiences onto them, to be able to build their confidence. And I mean, to build their confidence, in a very realistic way, where when they address society and reality, they're not just left with little moves, but they have the confidence from within to be able to respond to what happens on the outside. I can't tell you how many kids I have coming in from other schools, well-known schools, that although they, not only are they having a hard time going through the basic kicks and moves, but they're at a high level too, black belts at a very, very early age, that can't stand up to the school bully. There's got to be a problem there. You can teach a kid moves, but you can't teach them how to transfer those moves outwards if it doesn't come from within. So here we come to the summer now, and the smarter parents, they're going to keep their kids in the martial arts academy. Why? Because this is a skill-based activity. The only thing that comes natural to us is walking and running in terms of activity. And even if you want to get into competitive running, that's not even natural anymore. Now you really have to hone those skills. My advice to a lot of people is, if you know your child is having a problem, there's a potential, or he's timid, he lacks confidence, he's in a position where he's too shy, he almost looks like a potential victim, the best thing that you can do is put him in a good martial arts program, go around, investigate, look at teachers, look at schools, ask questions. Don't just put him in there because of cost or whatever, it costs cheaper or this or that. Ask and keep on asking, and try and do it now before the summer's over, because don't wait until they go back into school, especially if they already have a problem with somebody. You want to prepare them for when they go back to school, because 2.5 months is 2.5 months of mental conditioning, mental and physical conditioning, which will already give them a head start as to when they go into school, they've already developed confidence within themselves. This is the right time to do it. So if you think this helps anybody else, please like and share and pass it on, and I'll be seeing you guys very soon. I hope everybody has a good summer. I will be back with part 2 of this, because it is a big subject and I don't want to take up more of your time. I've already done over 20 minutes, and I do want to address other areas of this and what happens to a child, and telltale signs that your kid is being bullied, and how to address those. So until next time, take life into your own hands before it slips through your fingers.